Hi, we're going to take a look at Backdraft sports drafting software. We're up to version 5, and I'm going to take you through some of the features of the draft that will help you get the most out of the drafting experience when your night comes. So let's jump right in and take a look at a draft that I've already put together. There it is up on the screen, and there's quite a bit to look at, so we're just going to talk our way through it. This is the configuration screen, which is going to look very similar to the actual drafting screen. There's a few notable differences, and we'll point them out as we go. So let's just start at the top here. So I have a draft with 55 players. I know that because I can see the rank numbers 1 through, if I scroll all the way to the bottom, 55. I have 9 rounds. The rounds are listed here, and they're color-coded in alternating shades of blue, so I got 1 through 9. I have my players' ages and their player number. That's just the numeric designation that they got at evaluations that will help you identify them and find them as you proceed through the draft. We've got the players' randomly assigned names to protect the innocent, and their score, which is just the cumulative score that they received as a result of evaluations. And then there's a indication of the round in which they will be required to be drafted based on certain criteria that we'll delve into in a minute. And that's the players, the ranks, the rounds, and over on the right, the team navigator lists the teams that are in the draft and some information about each team. We've got the team name, the order in which they'll be picking. Some of them are designated in advance, some are not at this point in the draft. The cumulative score for round 1, because that dictates the picking order, the number of required and requesting players, and any conflicts. And as I click on teams in the navigator, I get a bit more detail about that team. So I see the Dodgers have 2 required players. I'm sorry, the Giants have 2 required players, and the Dodgers have a single required player. And as I click on the players in the draft, I get information about them over here in the player navigator. So let's take a look at some of these colored flags that are giving us some clues about what's going on with the players. Let's check out Matias. He has a requirement to be on the Dodgers, so when the Dodgers' first pick is to be made, they will get Matias and will have no choice in the matter. You can see they have 1 required player, and they have already picked up the score that was assigned to Matias as their cumulative score for round 1. So let's talk about scores for a minute. A typical snake draft dictates that the picking order is known in advance, and you don't deviate from that. And the difference with Backdraft is that the picking order is based on the team with the lowest score, so lowest score picks next. That means that the picking order is a little bit dynamic. It doesn't always proceed in the linear fashion that a snake draft would. It's a little unpredictable, but it does make for more fair teams by the time the draft is finished. And so this red flag here is players that have to be on a certain team. These 2 have to be on the Giants, and it's been determined that because they have to be on the same team, it will be required that they're drafted in rounds 1 and 2. We have some other flags here. The sort of tangerine colored one is players that must play with another player. So it's not required that they be on any particular team, but it is required that they both end up on the same team. So if I click on Naima, I can see that she wants to play with Deja, and if I click on Deja, I can see she needs to play with Naima. Team requests are just something that can hopefully be honored. The draft does not enforce them. So Oscar would like to play on the Cardinals, and the last type of request is players that would like to play with each other. So not required, but nice if it happens. And if I click on Anya, I can see that she would like to play with Cannon, and that reciprocal arrangement is shown up if I click on Cannon, that he would like to play with Anya. So that's what the color cues mean. And I'm going to add 1 more set of requirements to the end of the draft. I'm going to pick Nancy, and I'm going to say that she must play with Harper, who's right below her. Okay, so those 2 pick up the tangerine colored flag, and that's going to force a situation as the end of the draft approaches, which we'll talk about when we get there. So once the draft is all configured, and you won't have to sit through this configuration, this will happen in advance. It doesn't hurt to know what all this means because it looks very similar during the draft. So if you didn't pick up every nuance along the way, don't worry about it. There'll be plenty of explanation during the draft. But that's the background on how the draft's configured prior to the actual beginning of the draft. Now, as you can see, there's 4 teams that don't have a picking order assigned. That's because they have no player in the first round by default. We can flip a coin the old-fashioned way and assign it like that, or I'm just going to hit the coin flip button because I trust that that's random enough. And at this point, we're ready to start the draft. We have a picking order for each team. We have a list of players with all their requirements and requests locked in, and I'm going to start the draft. So we leave the configuration and move on to the draft itself, which, as I said, looks a lot like the configuration screen. We have all the same data over on the left. We have the colored flags for visual cues. One obvious addition is the select button, which is how players actually get assigned to teams. And then once a team does pick up a player, the team will be listed in the team column here, and we'll see how that works. All right, our picking order has been established. No team has been assigned any players yet, although there's some pre-assignments that will be forced as they come around. So we'll just get going and pick up a player for the Mets. So the Mets have the first pick. Up here on the team navigator, you can see who's picking right here, and the emphasized text color, and who's on deck right after that. So keeping an eye on that will help speed the draft by knowing when it's your turn. So let's pick up Naima for the Mets. And you can see that a couple things happen when I make that selection. Number one, the team gets filled in. The Mets move to the bottom of the picking order. And I can see the Mets roster coming together down here. They've already got their first player. They have the score that was attributed to that player. And they have one player on their team. And because the Mets picked up this player that has a requirement to play with another player, the Mets will be forced into making that second round selection. We'll see that when that comes around. All right, so we'll just keep on with the draft. Cardinals, pick up Caden. You can see the Cardinals moved, interestingly, not to the bottom of the draft or the pick but index, but the second to the last. That's because of the score. Remember, highest or lowest pick goes first, so that's where that unpredictability comes in. Okay, and I'm just going to keep on moving down the draft here, selecting players. So Raven went to the Yankees. Again, the Yankees didn't go to the bottom of the order. They're only 4 picks away from picking again. We're going to assign Wade to the Reds. And now we're at the point that the Giants are picking up their first required player. Remember, Myra had to be on the Giants, and there's no choice but to select her as the first round pick for the Giants. And same for the Dodgers. The Dodgers had a requirement that Matias be on their team. So all the buttons disappear other than the one for the choice that has to be made. So we'll go ahead and make that. And interestingly, the Giants are back up at the top again, and their required second round pick is the only selection available to them. So I'll go ahead and make that. And now I can continue proceeding on through the draft in regular fashion here. And if anything interesting comes up, we'll talk about it. The Mets have Naima, and they are making their second round pick, and Deja and Naima need to play together, so we are forced into making that selection. And with the next pick, each team, you can see, has 2 players. And this number up here, the delta, is the difference between the average score of the highest scored team and the lowest scored team. And it's a pretty small number, which means the teams are fairly neck and neck. And I'm going to scroll down to the middle of the draft and point out something that bears talking about. This draft has 55 players. It's not a number that goes into 6 evenly. It means there's 1 player left over at the end. The team that picks last will pick up Ignacio from the middle of the draft. The logic there being that it's more fair as your 10th pick if you're the only team with 10 players to pick up someone from the middle of the draft rather than a very last round pick. That's why the select button for Ignacio is not available, and it won't be until every other player has been picked. So I'm just going to cruise on through the draft here, picking people until we get to close to the end. All right, as I approach the bottom of the draft, you can see that every team has 8 players except for 2 teams that have only 7. These 2 players have a requirement to play together, which means that there's only 2 teams right now that have the capacity to take on 2 players. And as I make my next selection, if I elect not to pick one of them for the Reds, these 2 will be guided onto the Giants team because the Giants will be the only remaining team with capacity for 2 players. So let's see how that works. So I make my selection for the Reds, and as the Giants come to the top of the picking order, they're the only team with capacity for 2 additional players. They have to pick up these 2 players. I can continue making selections until the Giants come back up again. And as the Giants are picking, they're required to pick up that second pair. All right, so we've reached almost the end of the draft. You can see that every team has 9 players, and we just need to worry about that set-aside player in the middle of the draft. His button has become enabled. He's selectable at this point, and he will automatically go to the Cardinals because they are the team with the lowest score. So I will make that selection, and the draft is effectively finished. So you can see what happened. The scores range from 42 to 47. The average difference based on the number of players on the team and the score is a very small number, 0.06, which means the teams are pretty darn fair. And at this point, I can hit export, and I will get my rosters, one for each team, in an Excel format that allows the coach to reach out to their team, make contact, and get the season underway. So thanks for checking this out, and hopefully you'll enjoy your backdrafting experience.